Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Morgan, and welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today, we're talking with Brian Belcher, COO and co-founder of Vector. Brian, how is everything over in your world?
We are doing okay. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate y'all having us. We're hanging in there. I think things are probably a little bit easier for us as a technology company. We are obviously still all working from home, but in some ways we should be able to handle that. And a lot of what we build is helping others to work from home as well. And that's obviously being asked quite a bit right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think I think I'm in month 4 of working from home almost at this point. It feels
Is that
like,
what
or
it
we'll be
is?
going into it with July. So, we're all kind of
Oh
caught
my
up at
God.
that point, video conference experts. Now, before we dive into our topic, we're going to talk about paperless operations here, and really specifically paperless maintenance and how fleets can get into that. Can you just start us off by giving us a little background on Vector? It was a new name to me, so just kind of what your company's goal is in the transportation world and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, definitely. So, we started about 5, almost 6 years ago, and initially it was very much targeted to, I would say the vision on day one was digitizing the bill of lading and how can we ultimately go paperless. I think that's something that everyone's been wanting and wondering about for years. There's a lot of reasons why that's very difficult, just given supply chain and so initially we kind of fell back into building more tools, a tool set for carriers. And it's really to understand and respect the fact that the bill of lading is going to be paper for quite a while longer, although it's quite different today. And so we ended up building more of a workflow to allow for those bill of ladings to be sped up and really accelerate the internal processes for a carrier to where even though they have to deal with paperwork, they can at least get those documents to who needs it, wherever they are, immediately upon delivery. That has put us into a very interesting place today where we're finding a lot of other aspects of the operation that we are now in a good place to help digitize, maintenance being one of those.
Right, for sure, and it's something that I've been talking a lot about more so in the past couple months with everything going on. Clearly, as we mentioned here, we're all working in a digital environment to some degree now with some of the remote working and work from home. So let's just take a quick step back because I know within the service industry and within aftermarket specifically, workflow is still very phone call based. Very paper-based, even fax-based to some fleets, right? Still using that kind of older technology. So, from your view in building a tool set and working out with fleets to digitize their process, what are the biggest basic challenges for fleets moving into a paperless maintenance workflow?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately about really the thinking about how they structure their operations and the personnel and really, in making a migration, it's needing to understand, really who needs what hardware and who can really operate remotely. And what we found was, oftentimes when carriers were initially deploying our solution, it was very much about scanning, right? It was very much about from a mobile device, and we allowed them to select what document types a driver can upload, and then
Right.
to decide who should automatically get that document type. And initially it was obviously everyone wanted to speed up the bill of lading, and so it's more difficult in thinking about to where you might have trip sheets or inspection sheets, and obviously the DVIR to where those are already embedded in many ways, even if it is still paperwork. They're embedded in other systems, whether it is like TMT, whether it's your maintenance system, right, or your TMS. And there's a lot of roles and functions that really connect to when we think about inspections or maintenance. And you really need to map that out. And so, whereas on the billing side for a proof of delivery, it's much more simple to say, capture bill of lading, get the load number, trip number, pass it straight into the imaging or billing software.
Mhm.
Maintenance is a much more complicated workflow because you have many roles, right? You have many parties at play, both internal, potentially external. We deal with a lot of tanker fleets to where they may work with, obviously, with third-party vendors for maintenance. And when you think about that, it's really you need more of a collaborative system, right? So workflow is very different there, and I think it's just sometimes it can be slower to figure that out because you really need to process map everything, who gets what when, for these exceptions, what happens, and how do you make sure that that data gets into the right places, into the right system. Just requires
Right.
a lot more solutions gathering.
So for sure. So how do you bring that together? So one of the things that you mentioned that has come up before in a number of the conversations here recently is those daily inspections, right? Digitizing that, using that as a foundation for service, right? Because if you catch something in the inspection, then it's going to lead to some sort of service down the road that you can tie all that together. From your point of view, how can fleets start bringing that together with the service data and working collaboratively in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a much more friendly environment or ecosystem now. Just in many ways, we very much thank the ELD mandate in terms of you have a lot of the newer platforms and even some of the incumbents to where APIs are much more readily accessible and available. You can really build on top of and get your data from and to where it needs to go. So a lot of what we focused on is whether you are already using your DVIR inside your ELD or you're still operating on paper, it's much more easy in a sense, get data from your systems to augment your workflows. So in many ways, we obviously need to know certain data from the TMS. We need to know which tractor that driver's on, and especially when they're slip seating, right? It's more complicated to where if you think of the DVIR, old days, you're essentially leaving the DVIR on the seat, next driver comes in. There's a real kind of transfer there that needs to happen digitally. So integrating with the systems is much more possible now than I think it was even 5 years ago. And I think we saw a real big change in a lot of the platforms that really allow for other companies that, like us, who are very focused in one area, to be able to complement those systems.
Right. No, yeah, for sure. And so if I'm the ELD mandate, I possibly have digital driver inspections and logs already going. What do I look for from a solutions provider? What should I expect, or what tools are out there that are going to help me plug all these things in, as you've kind of alluded to already?
Yeah. Um, I think if you really look, I mean, we've had a very interesting perspective in really getting to see and experience working with a good number of the ELD. So we partner with, from the, as I say, incumbents, or, we have a very strong partnership with PeopleNet, Trimble Transportation Mobility, and even down to some of the newer companies like a Platform Science or a Keep Truckin', right? And I think what we look to is where those platforms are becoming more open, right? Where they really allow for more of this kind of app-based MDM approach, where a carrier can decide, does that ELD provider or does that telematics vendor have what I need? And some cases, and we will even say this to the carrier, yeah, that's just fine. In more of a complicated workflow for certain carriers, maybe that are more specialized, that's where more of a custom workflow might make sense. And certain ELDs are obviously more friendly and easier to work on top of than others. So we really kind of encourage, and it's even as simple sometimes as, when you're making that choice of which ELD or which hardware to purchase, there's obviously a lot of reasons why going tablet and a handheld, right, something that can be, removed from the dock of the truck. DVIR is critical because if you think about it, for years with fixed mount, you never had the ability to take a photo of that defect. And if we think about the crux of the problem right now, which is you don't want your drivers having to walk into the maintenance shop and interact with the maintenance team,
Right.
or even with that third party vendor where they are going to drop off the tractor or the trailer. And that's where you need to be able to give more context, more awareness to whoever is ultimately on the receiving end of that. So I think that's another just point in terms of, as you're looking at hardware side of it, regardless of the software, pick the hardware that supports, really, as you think about safety and inspections, and you're weighing that in terms of, do we want fixed mount? There's obviously pros and cons to both, but surely maintenance teams right now are really loving the idea of getting photos immediately and not having to connect with the driver in person.
Right. No, for sure. And I think to your point too, something that is evolving within these conversations is fleet managers being able to go to those service providers and saying, okay, well, what is the integration process? What do you offer? How do if I have a solutions provider I want to work with, how can I get the right data to those people in a form that they can use easily? Because integrations sound fun and easy, but I know that the reality is a little messier than just plugging something in, right?
Very, very true. And that's where, as we think, I think I mentioned earlier, like TMT, right? Like there's certain ones where the road is paved in many ways, and I think in today's world, like for how we develop, because APIs are becoming very much more available, and the technology really was. I don't think if we look at the past decade, it wasn't as much a technological issue. It was more of kind of the business environment. Who would allow for, which telematics solutions would work with which companies. And it was more of a business competition side of things of, well, we might do that. And so where things were slower or more difficult to integrate, it was, to me, it was never really on the technology side. It was more on, would we see this kind of collaborative and really an acceptance of more of this ecosystem that, hey, you know what, we focus just on this, you guys do a whole bunch, but maybe we can do this really well if we have our 40 engineers that are just doing this all day long. And we're seeing more ELDs, whether they like it or not, like kind of accept that. And carriers are able to, there's more choice. And we're now seeing, it's so interesting, like feels like we just got out of the ELD mandate, and yet we're now going to be coming on, and we finished the migration on the AOBRD, right? For the large, we're now about to reach once again this kind of, for some of your first fleets that are coming to the end of their initial contract periods. Or you have fleets that opted for more of that SaaS platform to where maybe they were month to month. And so you're going to see, I think on the carrier side, there are more ELD, there are more telematics options to choose from. There's more flexibility from a contract perspective. And you're going to see carriers look to, I think, really kind of raise their voice and say, we want that, figure out how to integrate it. Right. And so as long as that's happening, the technology side is actually, it's really easy to really, through API, through SFTP, right, through, I mean, a number of methods.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that kind of speaks to the evolving data rights and privacy conversations that are going on within the industry, being able to make that connection a little smoother. And I mean, to your point, we've seen the marketplaces that have popped up among providers to be able to, reach out to those suppliers and say, yeah, I want that, click that on. It's just kind of a cool add-on service. I mean, everyone's talked about the truck is kind of a rolling cell phone for a couple of years now, and it was a fun marketing line, but now it's relatively true, right? I mean, you can see it, you can plug things into it over the air without stopping it to do an install. So very interesting.
And again, in some ways, like there's obviously, like looking back now on the ELD mandate, I mean, it kind of provided the opportunity of a platform, right. And so you would hope that we are in this position where, those challenges that I think carriers faced for the longest time, which is drivers that don't want to use their personal devices and data questions and all of that, that really, I think that's where you can now do so much, everything from, as I mentioned, like one of our core focuses, which is, freight paperwork. So just BOLs, freight bills, and lumper receipts and all that coming back. But now you can take what surely we see for all carriers, whether it is the DVIR that they might still be doing on paper, or it's a pre-trip, post-trip, depending on what you're hauling, JHA's safety forms, right? All of that can be digitized, can be electronic. And to be able to do that on the telematics device that you invested in makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, and yeah, we've even seen, even with everything going on with the pandemic now, we've seen more conversations in regards to fleets actually looking at that data now, right? Where, to your point, the ELD solution was something that I had to have, and now it's like, oh, well, I'm glad I have it. It gives me better visibility into what's going on. Or if I don't see what I need to see, then I can start looking for something that will give that to me, right? And as we're talking about the maintenance side of it, I think, is still coming along, right? It's kind of like the wave that's just about ready to build that you could kind of latch onto. From your point of view and working to this, developing it, working with fleets, where are they going to see the ROI on this paperless maintenance workflow, and how can they expect to realize that over a certain period of time?
Yeah, I think going paperless, you achieve standardization for one, right? Like you obviously get more real-time operations, and so maintenance is able to plan much better. When you're deciding and trying to understand your capacity, and if you're going to have overflow and need to work with third parties, or you need to obviously, there's a certain repair where you can't handle it internally, and like all of that today is very delayed. in some ways, or it happens over the phone. So a lot of that can be automated as we talk about through these integrations. We right now we are deployed our DVIR solution to one of the larger tankers in the industry, to where the challenge was they would ultimately bring their truck back to their shop. They would review there, and then they would drive it to a third party, probably 30% of the time is they were. And so that, if you think about the paper transfer process and the risk that has and the time delay of that, that's something where, in many ways, a workflow solution can allow the third party vendor in that case to get the same visibility immediately. And you can essentially workflow and in a sense, assign it to one of your vendors. So there's a lot from real time, immediate access to this information, the records of that, right? Always be able, cloud storage. I mean, it's incredible how really we reinvented and the improvements that we've seen in storage, to where you don't have to worry about servers and managing that, or how much space you have left, right? Because that's obviously on us. And so all of that, being able to always have the history and be able to create reports and analytics off of really where your maintenance either issues or opportunities for improvement are, you can really get a better sense of that. And it's standardization. It's back to that. It's very easy when you have a new driver that doesn't know how to fill out your pre-trip inspection, right? And then it comes back to the office, and then you're sitting there as the maintenance, you're in the shop and you're trying to figure out what it is that they just submitted. Electronically, you can put up guardrails, right? And that's what we see a lot and that has on the billing side too, AP. There's a lot of benefits to that.
For sure. And, as you kind of put it, you'll see, I mean, the planning was really cool. I know that, a lot of this is focused on emergency repair, but there's a ton of visibility that can happen in terms of preventative maintenance workflows, building that history so that you kind of know what's coming in the next 3, 6, 12 months in terms of preventative cycles and common occurrences that you see within your fleet that were specific to you. And then to your point, you just build on it, right? You see the ROI, but then you build and build and build, and the ripples are very cool.
Yeah, and it's very, like, as we think of workflow, right? Or if you think of POD, capturing a bill of lading, or a DVIR, in some ways on paper they're very isolated, right? But if you are digitizing that, you achieve a broader workflow to where you ensure that these tasks are complete, because you can essentially, on your ELD tablet, you can display to the driver the trip that they are dispatched on that day, and you can ensure that, hey, to depart, right, or to basically, you have to do the pre-trip, and you have to do the DVIR, and you can't upload the POD before you do that, and you can't get your next trip displayed to you in the app until you do your post-trip. So, like, a lot of that, there's always that issue of, did my driver do that? Did we get this? And that's where, again, digitization allows you, kind of to what you're mentioning there, it allows you to really kind of accomplish that end to end.
For sure. Very cool. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it as well. Take care, okay?